the explainer. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the invisible strings that guide our choices. We're diving into the subtle psychology that influences what we do, what we buy, and who we trust. And a lot of the time, we don't even realize it's happening. So let's just jump right in with a simple experiment that it might make you question your own free will. It's a really fascinating look into how our surroundings quietly steer our choices. Okay, the setup is super simple. A researcher goes up to strangers in a mall and asks for their phone number. And you can probably guess what happened. Most people said no. The success rate was pretty dismal. That is, until they changed one tiny detail about where they asked. And this is where it gets crazy. Check out that jump in yeses when the person was standing in front of a flower store. Why? Well, because flowers subconsciously prime us to think about romance, making people way more open to the request, without them ever knowing why. This powerful phenomenon actually has a name. It's called persuasion. It is the art of setting the stage before you ever make your case. And believe me, it's one of the most powerful psychological tools out there. So let's really get into this. Persuasion isn't about the words you use or the argument you make. No, it's about creating the perfect mental runway first. It's all about that moment before the moment. That's what really counts. A really great way to think about it is like gardening, right? You could have the best seed in the world. That's your message, but it's not going to grow if you just toss it on hard, unprepared soil. You have to till the soil first, create a receptive mindset before you plant that seed. And this next example, wow. It just shows you how incredibly subtle these triggers can be. In one study, researchers just changed the background wallpaper on a furniture website. That's it. And they watched to see how it would affect what people bought. The results were just stunning. When the background showed fluffy clouds, people started prioritizing and even paying more for comfy furniture. But when the background had coins on it, suddenly they became super price sensitive, hunting for the best bargain. And the craziest part, not a single person knew why their priorities had just shifted. Now, this doesn't just work with pictures, it works with words too. Let me tell you about this consultant who was having a really hard time selling a $75,000 service because everyone pushed back on the price. So he tried something new. He added one simple little joke right before he said the price. By jokingly throwing out this absurdly high number, $1 million, the actual $75,000 price tag suddenly seemed way more reasonable in comparison. That one little persuasive trick, that anchor, it almost got rid of negotiations entirely. Okay, so those triggers work on a one-on-one basis, right? But what happens when you create a connection between people? Well, that brings us to one of the most powerful persuasive tools of all. The principle of unity, this idea of creating a shared sense of us. So here's the deal. When we feel like someone is part of our tribe, our family, our team, our community, our defenses just drop. Our willingness to say yes and cooperate just skyrockets. This is a deep evolutionary thing. Back in the day, sticking with your group literally meant survival. The legendary investor Warren Buffett is an absolute master of this. By framing his advice to all his shareholders as the exact same advice he'd give his own family, he creates this instant, powerful bond of trust. He's not just some outsider, he's bringing you into the family circle. And this principle works in the words we use every single day. Think about it. When you ask for someone's opinion, you kind of create distance, right? You turn them into a critic who takes a step back. But when you ask for advice, that's different. That creates a partnership. You're inviting them to come over to your side of the table. Just look at this number, 97%. So a researcher was getting this awful response rate from parents for a survey. We're talking less than 20%. He made one tiny change. He offered students one extra credit point to get help from a family member, and the response rate shot up to 97%. Incredible, right? That sense of family unity was all it took. All right, so we've talked about the invisible game, all that subconscious stuff. Now let's switch gears and look at the visible game of influence, active charisma. And for this, we're going to use the actor Pedro Pascal as our case study to see how specific habits can build these really powerful, immediate connections. You see, people with that kind of charisma, it's not an accident. They actively build connections. And they have a few key habits. They're not afraid to laugh at themselves. They say the nice things they're thinking about other people out loud. They make sure to pass the spotlight in a conversation, and they know how to use conversational hooks to make you lean in and want to know more. So one of the most effective hooks is something called the surprise positive twist. You start with something that sounds negative, like Pedro Pascal talking about his character's gruesome death on Game of Thrones. But then, boom, you completely flip it. That contrast creates instant intrigue. And here's another one that's it's almost impossible to resist. By saying something like this, you're signaling that the story is exclusive or maybe a little bit secret. It just creates this immediate desire in the other person to say, no, tell me. It makes what you say feel so much more valuable. So we've looked at the invisible triggers, we've looked at the visible habits. And all this brings us to what is, honestly, the most important part of this whole conversation. How do you use this knowledge ethically, and how do you build up a shield against manipulation? Look, it's so important to get this. These tools aren't good or bad. They're neutral. They can be used to manipulate people, for sure, or they can be used to build real, genuine connection. The goal should always be to communicate more effectively and to raise people up, not to trick them. And on that note, just remember that you are not immune to this stuff. A classic way these principles can be used against you is by triggering our deep-seated need to return a favor. So be really mindful when someone does a small favor for you, like giving you a free sample, right before they ask for a big one. It's a textbook technique that uses that feeling of obligation as bait. So, in the end, understanding these principles gives you both a toolkit for connection and a shield against manipulation. It empowers you to see the invisible strings that guide so much of our behavior, which leaves you with one final, crucial question to think about. Now that you can see the game, how are you going to choose to play?